Okay.
I had the pleasure of going to hop on and finding my internet was down 20 minutes ago, and I was like, ah!
Well, excuse me for one second, guys. Hello?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read the that script. I'm going to call the, what is today? January 14th, 2021 meeting of the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust to order. So confirming member access. As a preliminary matter, this is Brooke Moore, Vice Chair of the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Penny Dye.
Here.
Christy Ferrantella.
Here.
Dave Iverson. He's here on the phone. We know he's here. Allison Mitchell.
Here.
Great. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tucker Holland.
Here.
Is Eleanor here?
She will not be here today.
Oh, okay, great. That's right. She's working from Ken Bogrand.
Here.
Okay, great. And I see we don't have any speakers planned on the agenda, but I see that Howard Dickler is here from the community. Howard, can you hear us?
I can, thanks.
Terrific.
Brooke, I'm here. You didn't call me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rima.
That's okay, but
My
just for
phone's
the record,
ringing.
Rima Sherry here.
Comcast is calling me to see if they fixed my internet. Okay, thank you, Rima. Sorry. Sorry for my distraction there. All right, good afternoon. This open meeting of the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such public participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. For this meeting, the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see you and to take care not to share your screen. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our meetings to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait till the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after the members have spoken, the chair will afford public comments as follows. After the members have spoken, the chair will afford public comments to those members of the public that have joined via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken at this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Okay, so if we are prepared to get going, I would ask for a motion to approve our agenda.
So moved.
Second.
By Penny, do I have a second by Dave, just in front of Christie. Okay, by roll call vote, Penny Dye,
Aye.
Dave Iverson,
Aye.
Christie Ferrantella,
Aye.
Ally Mitchell,
Aye.
and Rena Sherry.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye as well. Okay. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our January 5th, 2021 meeting. Thank you, Penny, for, I think, submitting, or was that to a different committee, or I don't know what happened there, but is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Dave, second by Christie.
Yes.
By roll call, Penny,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Christie,
Aye.
Ally,
Aye.
Rima,
Aye.
and the vice chair votes aye. Okay, Brooke. Okay, so next item on our agenda is Covenant Formation Assistance Program application for 4 Hull Lane. Tucker?
Just a moment. I'm not sure that I'm looking at the same agenda that you are.
Am I looking at, you're right, you're not. I'm looking at next week's agenda. Ha,
Oh,
well, there we have it. We jumped ahead. Thank you. All right, so we did something that was on next week's agenda. I guess we should do it again next week. My apologies, everyone. I'm now in the right week. So I think we'll go back and approve the actual agenda from today since I wasn't looking, or do we need to?
Well,
What do we
I
think
you
from a
approved
process?
the agenda for today. Just
Even though I was looking at the wrong one.
But I think you need to undo the approval of the minutes because you have not been provided the minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, all right. Do I have a motion to revoke that?
So moved.
I'll make the motion since I had made the motion to
Okay.
approve it.
Okay, Penny with
Second.
Rima as a second, but by roll call, Penny,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Christie,
Aye.
Ally,
Aye.
Rima,
Aye.
and concluding our time reversal, Brooke votes aye. Okay, so now we have the next item on the agenda, which is the only item on the agenda, financial discussion. Tucker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks everyone for making time for this today. I think you all will recall that in the planning for the town budget this year, there originally had not been included an allocation toward the Affordable Housing Trust, and the select board had requested the town manager and finance director and a team of folks, which ended up including Ken and Christy and myself, to take a closer look at finding a way to fund what is needed for the trust, at least in the immediate term. So I'm going to try to screen share here.
So I'm gonna ask, while Tucker's screen sharing, if someone has a question, please just unmute yourself and chime in because I can't see everybody with the screen share.
Before doing that, I just was going to say that, this group met last week to discuss how this might be approached. So I think the first thing we're going to do is just look at where we have committed the funds that we have available to us today, and therefore what we are left with, and then look at some initial projection of need over the course of the next few years. We actually have a continuation of the financial discussion on the agenda for next Tuesday's meeting, but there's an important component of this discussion that we need to address today, which is why we are having this special meeting. So without further ado, I will put up this document. Can everybody see that?
Too small.
Too small. Okay, how do I make it bigger?
Bottom,
Oh, yes.
do I see a plus sign? Yeah,
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
yes.
So again, this is a document that you all are somewhat familiar with anyway. Here at the top, we just have broken out the sources of funding that the trust has had over the course of recent years since 2016. You can see the various buckets and the accumulated totals. The highlighted 800,000 relates to our request to the CPC in this current upcoming annual town meeting appropriation, which was developed in cooperation with Habitat and Housing Nantucket. So as we scroll down a little bit, we get into the uses of the funding that is available to us. And you can see it's broken out a bit, color coded by what has maybe technically been expended and then what is either planned for or otherwise committed. So there's some operational related items. You can see there are costs associated with the closing cost assistance program for past years and then planned for current year. We go a little further down and we get into some of the things that we have expended money on. 135, 137 Orange Street, for example, the 7 Amelia Drive property. And then, as you know, there are several other things in the works here related to extension of our safe harbor period and other opportunity that the trust has been afforded. As well, you can see we have included in here the planned funding of some continued work on behalf or by, I should say, Habitat for Humanity. Just a small note with regard to the Benjamin Drive 3 units. We previously have been planning for 975,000 in support of the 3 units there. They are going to be coming to us at the next meeting for a small additional request of support for this project. They had I'm realizing it is not actually in conjunction, this 85,000 with the Benjamin Drive units, but with the 31 beach grass units, that they have funding available. They had funding that they thought they could use for 31 beach grass that is tied to a specific lot actually on Waite Drive. And so they have a shortfall with what they want to do at 31 Beachgrass, the 2 duplexes, and they're going to be coming to seek your additional support above the 460 for the completion of that project. We'll get more into that at the next meeting, but I thought I would note it here. And then similarly under Housing Nantucket, they have several projects planned over the course of the next year, in addition to hopefully getting more applications for the Covenant Formation Assistance Program. Kind of the punchline to the whole slide here is that if everything were to unfold as is planned over the course of these next 6 to 12 months, we really will have gone through more or less all of the funds available to us, save the 2.3 million. So what that then brings up for us is, while what we have included here will contribute toward, let's say, a new 2-year period of safe harbor, we obviously want to be thinking about after that. And so here is how we are thinking about our financial requirements with regard to sort of 2 categories of things. One is continued safe harbor, and the other is everything else. So with regard to safe harbor, we want to be able to plan to locally subsidize 135 and 137 Orange Street. Similarly, our Neighborhood First Advisory Committee Pocket Development Strategy 2, as was noted on the prior page, the actual build out there. And then finally, the development at the old fire station site, which the select board has unanimously supported doing, a little further down the road. So that is, sort of 3 to 4 years out kind of thing. But we need to know that we have the funds available for the required subsidy to actually do it, obviously in advance of the construction starting. So that kind of says, in round numbers, we need to know that we have, $19 million additional available to us over the coming period. In addition to that, under the other projects and programs are some of the things that we have talked about a bit, maybe not in super detail, but if we presume that Housing Nantucket and Habitat want to continue with producing 2 units a year, if we assume that we're going to continue to want to support our closing cost assistance program, we're going to have basic professional service and education training, seminar attendance sort of costs every year. Hopefully one day COVID ends and those things can happen again. But we, so there are basic expenses in there. And then we've also included a line for what we're calling the shared equity down payment assistance program. So that is, as you know, one of the things that has been discussed for a while with regard to a program the trust would like to implement, allowing year-round residents to get the assistance required to purchase a home, presumably an existing home on the island, and be a part of the community over the longer term. But that obviously takes significant funding. There are a few of us who have been working with an excellent consultant on this type of possibility, and in round numbers, it is at least the initial thinking here is, it might require on the order of $300,000 of subsidy in order to make that program possible. So when we include a figure like $6 million here, we're talking about assisting 20 families. So this is kind of the big picture. The items on the bottom that we, would, again, we may get into more discussion on next week, but, that we would like to do.
Excuse me, sorry. Brooke went off, and so she needs to get let back in from the waiting room.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Brooke, are you back?
I'm here.
Okay, great. So we'll get a little bit more into that next week, but the main focus, if you will, for today is this need over the course of the next, let's say, 3 safe harbor periods. And so in the discussion that Christy, Ken, Libby, and Brian and I had, Brian had put forward really an extrapolation of the $5 million bonding idea that the CPC supported a couple years ago. So I think, the town budget has limited room in it. And so Brian's notion is that we have this resource within the community. It is limited in the areas in which it can be used to housing, preservation, and open space. Open space as a category obviously receives strong support from what the land bank does today. Therefore, it's sort of these 2 other priorities that the CPC may be best suited to address. And if we're saying that housing is this, critical challenge that the community needs to address, and I'm not sure there's no one on this call who would dispute that, then would it not make sense to go back to the CPC and see if they might commit an even greater portion of their revenues toward a bonding that might generate something on the order of $19 or $20 million a year? What that would mean is a commitment of the CPC to allocate an additional 1.25 million on top of the 350 they are doing for the $5 million bonding to generate this type of resource to be available for this purpose. And so the group discussed it and said this is worth pursuing, and therefore we want to put in a joint application to the CPC kind of on behalf of both the town and the trust, making this request. And at this point, I'll maybe stop talking. Ken, I don't know if you would like to add anything at this point, but I'm going to stop talking and let others ask questions or chime in.
So
I will wait to hear from any questions.
Yeah. Tucker,
Hi, Penny.
through Brooke to Tucker, I have a question, which is, are you talking about instead of 800,000 over 2 million?
In this particular year, we don't need the 1.25 in this year, but we need to know that it's available going into next year, so that when we put out an RFP for 135, 137 Orange Street, we know that we have the funds available to subsidize what we are looking at a developer to do.
So you're talking about what kind of number for next year?
Kenny, what we're talking about,
I think you're on mute, Ken.
Penny, what we're talking about is asking, in effect, making an early application to the CPC for the allocation of funding for the fiscal 2023 fiscal year, because what's in front of, and will be at town meeting this year, is the funding for the fiscal 2022
Right.
Calendar year. So what we're trying to do is to create and try to get a commitment that they would be prepared to, when they're making the recommendations for fiscal 2023, that they would be prepared to allocate an additional 1.25 million in addition to the previous commitment that exists relative to $350,000 for bonding for housing purposes, is what this approach would be.
So the 800,000 of this year has nothing to do with that. You're talking about what number? 1.6 million going forward?
We're talking about, there's 350,000 already guaranteed going forward. So what we're talking about is an additional 1.25 million committed over a 15-year period.
So 1.6 million a year.
Yeah.
Thank
correct.
you. That's all I was asking. Thanks.
That's right.
Is there anyone else who has a question?
This is Howard Dickler. I just had a question. The bottom number where it says grand total. What is that a grand total of? Because the two other boxes do not total that. What else is added in there?
That looks like a formula error there, Howard.
So it's supposed to be the sum of 19 and change and 31 and change.
That's correct.
Okay, yep, that's a formula error.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Howard. Anyone else have any questions before I ask mine? So I have a question for Ken, which is at $1.6 million a year for 15 years, where does that leave resources for historic preservation?
Basically, when I took a look at this, we generate about 2.3 to 2.4 million from the surtax, and we have been generating at least $500,000 or $600,000 from the state match. So if you're doing a rough number, you're looking at 3 million. So you then have to take 10% of that has to go to open space, 5% that has to go to administration, and then the balance of that would be available for historic preservation. So 1.6 is a little bit more than 50% of the amount available. If you're taking another 15% out, you've got whatever the difference is left in terms of available for additional housing, if there are other specific needs, or historic preservation.
Okay, thanks. My other question, and Tucker and I have talked about this, but I just want to put it on the public record, is that the restrictions on CPC bonding as to area median income limits, does that constrain the use of this for the projects we are thinking about utilizing these funds for, and does that present any issues of boxing us into a corner as to AMI limits on the developments we plan to use this money for?
Right. So the way that the $5 million bonding warrant article was worded and approved, it covers the range of 30% AMI to 200% AMI. And that wording was approved prior, obviously, to the warrant article being set by bond counsel, finance director, and town council. As we got into this exercise and thinking about this, even greater bonding, we've asked town council to confirm with bond council that indeed, this could serve up to the 200% AMI level, much like other funding streams that we've had available to us. So I don't have the definitive answer yet from town council on that, but they are actively working on it.
Okay. So there is some risk that this would dictate AMI levels for those projects and thus increase potential subsidies required if we can't have some market rate units to offset the cost of the lower income units. And then I just want to summarize and make sure that I'm understanding this, that this request to the CPC basically provides resources, financial resources for us to complete the projects that are under our mandate to maintain safe harbor and in our effort to get to our 10% SHI requirement from the state, but does not have enough money for us to concurrently do any home ownership opportunities or down payment assistance or other things that we have talked about doing. It would delay, without additional funding, it would delay those programs out for at least 3 years.
Yes, that's fair.
Okay, great. It was a rhetorical question a bit for the record. So I just want to make sure everybody understands both on the trust and in the public for anyone who watches this. So, okay, any other
This is Christy.
comments? Hey, Christy.
Hi. So just a couple comments and then a question. I had met with Tucker and Brian, and in terms of the availability of kind of the most bang for our buck and getting funding, I think this is a good approach to move forward. It kind of gives us a good backing to borrow the amount of money needed. The question I have, just for clarification and more for public record, is a guarantee for the next 15 years of this 1.6 million is so that we can have a one-time borrowing of about 19 million to cover our 40B for the next 3 years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So then CPC funds will be kind of tied up for the next 15 years just to keep us in safe harbor right now.
That's correct. That's the whole concern, is that you're restricting $1.6 million of the revenues available to the CPC are committed for the 15-year period to fund the cost of the bond.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I would say that because you mentioned 1.6, Christy, so like the 1.6 is really contributing to a 5-year period.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that we wouldn't be continuously borrowing, 15 to 19 million. This is kind of a one-time to help us stay in safe harbor and achieve that select board goal of maintaining safe harbor.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's fair to say that if the CPC and town meeting were to approve what is being proposed here, then we would have the resources necessary if the other things that are independent that are in the works, such as Richmond, such as Six Fairgrounds, were to happen on a concurrent timetable. At the end of this 5 years, we should be at the 10%.
And just to understand the timing, this would be a recommendation of the CPC to the 2020 2022 annual town meeting for the funds available being starting in July 1st of the 2023 fiscal year.
Any other, I have one more. Howard?
I think I got lost by the numbers. It's 1.6 million for 5 years. Exactly what is that going to pay for in the 5 years? Because I saw 3 projects up there, each of about 7 million for development. So I'm confused on what is actually being paid for.
So may I try to answer that to see if I understand? It's actually 15-year borrowing. In other words, the bonding will be paid off over 15 years at a rate of 1.25 per year. The 5-year time horizon is how we would expend those funds. So we would borrow them early to fund those 3 to complete those 3 projects within the next 5 years to maintain safe harbor, and assuming Richmond builds out as planned and Tacoma Green builds out as planned, we should achieve 10% at the end of a 5-year period. But the borrowing is, the debt service is 1.25 over 15 years, right? Do I have that correct?
That's correct. For Howard, the point is that the 1.25 and the 350 or the 1.6 million do not come to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. They go to pay off the cost of the borrowing, which is existing 5 million plus an additional 17 or 19 million dollars. The 1.25 million then funds the ability to borrow between 17 and 19 million dollars, depending on the current interest rate, and that is the money that would be available to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to function, to be used to address the issues that are addressed in the second chart that Tucker put out with respect to the expenditures to help us meet Chilist and Safe Harbor over the next 5 years.
Thank you. I understand now.
Okay, Penny?
Yeah, is this predicated on knowing what the 10% is going to be in 15 years?
No, it's predicated on knowing what the 10% number is now. And we know that we're going to get an updated 10% number probably next year.
Okay, thanks.
So if no one else has another question, I have another question. So if the CPC has been an important source of revenue for us for housing Nantucket projects and for habitat projects, and so by setting aside such as more than 50% of the CPC's potential available funds, does that mean we're likely to have to find other sources in those 15 years to support habitat and housing Nantucket?
I don't know the answer to that, but my guess is that it's going to be difficult to be able to get additional funding, but depends on the nature of the requests for basically in the historic preservation category, because realistically, that's the only category where you're going to need funds. But more importantly, one of the things that provides some comfort to me is that over the last 19 years, we have put multiple tens of millions of dollars into historic preservation. So there is not a lot of historic preservation that's still left undone. So I think that in terms of a concern with respect to there being a huge pile of requests still out there, I don't see that, although I may be wrong.
This is Christy. Just to kind of follow up on Brooke's question. And Tucker, in your spreadsheet of what we would need over the next 3 to 4 years, did that include funding towards habitat and housing Nantucket?
So in the upper portion, the safe harbor portion, those numbers are not included there. They are included in the area below. So I just can screen share that again if it's helpful.
And while you're doing that, can Ken just clarify, it's 10% to each of the 3 areas, a minimum of?
The answer, that's correct, Penny. We
Thank
we have to give a minimum of 10% to each area. And we are allowed to use up to 5% for administrative costs. The other 65% are to be allocated as deemed in the most needed issues relative to the community that we're serving.
Thank you.
And just as a point of information, for instance, this past year, there weren't sufficient requests for funding for open space. And so what we end up doing is we allocate that and we put it into a dedicated reserve account for open space that's available for requests in the future. So it doesn't get lost. Or again, if there were not a number of historical preservation requests, then anything that is below the 10% would be put into a reserve that would have only be able to be used for historic preservation in the future.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, so any other questions, comments? Okay, so Tucker, are you looking for a particular motion? Can you help us with that?
Sorry, Brooke, I have one more question.
Sure, Penny.
Yes, what is the first town meeting, the earliest town meeting at which we would be talking about this?
Oh, Ken, you're muted.
Asking for a vote.
Not this year's town meeting, next year's town meeting, because there's no, what we're doing is we're filing, basically we're filing an application early to the CPC with a request to have them consider this for funding for fiscal year 2023.
Okay.
What's at town meeting this year is a request for fiscal year 2022.
Okay. I'm stating the obvious when I say it's going to be an easier road if we have units built and people living in them by then, by the time we have to ask for this. Just editorializing. Thanks.
So that begs another question from me, which is this binding if the CPC passes it and it hasn't been voted on at town meeting? Is there any chance it can be revoked?
That's a question for town council, but the thing is that any vote that the CPC takes and recommends to town meeting is subject to town meeting approval. But the fact is that a request this early there's always subject to possibly being challenged and overridden at a point in time when it's time for the CPC to make its recommendations in the fall of this year for next year's annual town meeting.
Okay, all right, thank you. So for the record, it's not a sure thing. It never is anyway, because it has to go to town meeting, but even within the purview of the CPC to recommend for 2023, fiscal 23, it's not a sure thing. I just want everyone to know what we're agreeing to and the potential costs and benefits of that. Christy?
Thank you. Just one other comment that I've been thinking about since you mentioned it is, how can we have this be more of a collaboration with Housing Nantucket and Habitat? And so, I'm a little bit concerned about taking away the option of funding for them when they rely very heavily on CPC funding. So I'm not sure if, I don't want to delay anything, but if there's any going back to the drawing board and maybe it's asking for a little bit more money to be committed so that we do have funds, or Is there something that could come out of the town budget, similar to the Health and Human Services, that could go towards those institutions? I just think all of us need to be working towards affordable housing. And I know we're all competing for the same funding and the same land, but I want to make sure that we're working together and not against each other.
Thank you, Christy. Anybody else? Allie?
Yep, and I'm just stating again the obvious that I think everyone stated, but that just further shows that the Affordable Housing Trust needs a sustainable long-term funding solution, and we're all ready to be creative and find funding for these projects that we have already committed to. But discussions like this doesn't mean that we're kind of sitting on a throne and we're all set. As you can see from Tucker's spreadsheet, we need $50,000 to do that kind of minimal work of sorts over the next 5 years. So sustainable funding. Thank you.
50 million. Howard?
Just a question, because it's not clear to me, because I missed a lot of the budget discussions of the town. Is none of the income from rentals of houses going to affordable housing? Is that a correct statement? Or stated another way, despite the support of the select board for affordable housing, and in spite of putting it at the top of their strategic plan, they're not backing that up with any financial resources. So they're giving the Affordable Housing Trust, in essence, a mandate, but no funds to carry out the mandate.
I'd say that's correct. We've had a lot of discussions about how to allocate from the short-term rental tax, and there's a few drawbacks, which is why we are looking at the CPC funding. If I think that I can say as me, for myself on select board, if the CPC funding doesn't work, then we have to go back to the drawing board, or how do we do something in parallel? Because I think everybody on the select board is in favor of having funds from the short-term rental tax go towards affordable housing. There was just some concerns about if it needs to be in a stabilization fund, and a few other details that we are still trying to work out.
Thank you for that.
This is just a comment. If there is concern amongst this committee relative to the need for funding for Habitat and Housing Nantucket, you need to be satisfied that basically, if you go forward with this request, you're not going to be able to come back realistically with a request for additional funding for that. So the question is whether or not it's possible in terms of the budget process to wait for a month before you go back to the CPC with your request, having incorporated the concerns relative to Housing Nantucket and Habitat, or whether or not you want to move forward with this addressing a commitment to understanding the funding for the major initiatives to addressing the shy eligible issue and the safe harbor issue. It's just a point for discussion and for your thought. It's not something that I have input on, other than the fact is that you need to understand that when you're asking the CPC to make a commitment like this, coming back to them for other stuff is probably not going to be well received.
So I'm frustrated because it doesn't feel like we're asking the CPC for this. It sounds like the select board and town administration are telling us to ask the CPC for this, or there will not be funding for the trust. And while I recognize and value the willingness of the CPC to step up to the plate in this, I am very concerned it's another way for the town to absolve itself of its responsibility for funding this critical priority in the select board's strategic plan. And I am, I want to be very careful to not seem unappreciative. And yet I listen to select board meetings where voices say and directives are made to town administration to use the short-term rental additional revenue as it was intended when it was voted on by the select board, and yet they have yet again passed us off to the CPC with a commitment of $0 from what we know is a substantially increased revenue stream that is now being put in the general fund, absorbed away from the areas that from which it was intended for use when it was voted on, which I believe is disingenuous and frankly frustrates me. And I think at the very least, if we are going to pursue this avenue of funding, that we also need to make insist that our operations, that Housing Nantucket, and that Habitat necessary resources are funded out of the short-term rental income. And that at a minimum, we should be asking for an additional $1 million for those purposes from the select board this year and every year. And I don't think the stabilization fund is the problem. If the select board says and directs town administration to allocate $1 million of the 2022 budget lodging tax to the Affordable Housing Trust, there's no need for a stabilization fund. It's a direct funding of the work that we're doing. And I think that should be a parallel request. And I think perhaps we should delay this decision until we have a commitment from the select board to offer that additional funding to support the programs that will lose this revenue stream if we make this choice.
Hi, it's Rima. I'm back on.
Hi, Rima. Thank you. I'm so glad.
Oh God, I know I had to come outside with the phone. Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful that the CPC, could be willing to do this, but because of all the restrictions on the funds, it really just ties our hands in so many ways. And we just do need, a committed, regular town budget funding, and how on earth would we do down payment assistance? Where would that come from? That's not going to work under the CPC restrictions. And a lot of our closing cost assistance isn't going to work under that either. So it, as creative, of an idea as it is, I find it constricting, and I find it another kick the can when it comes to the Affordable Housing Trust situation that we have seen over and over again. And so, Brooke, I share your frustrations. Thanks.
Howard?
I'm just curious. It seems to me that a sum on the order of $5 million every year in the town budget would go a long way towards getting us where we need to go. So I'm kind of curious as to what would be the tax outcome of a $5 million override to the town budget to provide funding for the Affordable Housing Trust. It has the advantage that it would go up the same 2.5% per year, and it would always be there. So is it possible to make the inquiry of Brian what that would actually, what the implications would be?
Tucker?
For sure, we can inquire.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Christy?
Thank you. I wanted to hear from some other members before speaking. I think that you're absolutely right in that I think we have to be trying, as we always keep saying, to put as many tools in our toolbox as possible. So if there's no urgency to get in front of the CPC next week, I think it's worth delaying this another month and seeing if we can get this on a select board agenda. I can talk to Dawn or Tucker can, and kind of see where that funding goes, and then also discuss ways to incorporate housing, Nantucket, and habitat into some sort of funding stream. So that's kind of where I stand. I'd be okay delaying if the rest of the trust felt that way.
So I would ask the question to Ken, what is the downside of not doing this today? Is there a downside? Are we taking any sort of risk by waiting?
Well, there's not a downside from the CPC's point of view because it's an action that you're asking them to take that won't be implemented and formally confirmed until October or November of this year when they make their recommendations for the town meeting warrant article, even though they could approve it. The concern is with respect to where the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is relative to its sources of funding to being able to move forward to address the issues that are shown in Tucker's chart. So whether or not you wait for a month in terms of making the presentation, that's not going to have a significant effect on what the CPC does, but it may have some effect in terms of the thinking of Ryan and Libby relative to a comfort level of addressing the source of the funds for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to help us stay in safe harbor and address the shy list. But the thing is that as I said before, if you only go forward with this one initiative and don't have comfort in your own minds as to where the funding is going to come from the other initiatives that you're doing, you shouldn't plan on looking to the CPC for that funding, is my advice to you. I'm speaking to you as an individual, not as chairman of the CPC.
Thank you, Ken. I know we're all in wearing multiple hats in all of this. So, I guess what I would want to, Christy, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. One more question. Tucker, can you clarify with the short-term rental tax, if we were to be able to get the select board to allocate $1 million a year, that we wouldn't be able to use that to borrow the $15 million. Was that what Brian said in the meeting?
Yeah, that was the question that came up in the meeting, and he basically said that any borrowing that the town would do would be sort of under the general obligation of the town. So in effect, it wouldn't come specifically from that. John Giorgio talked about having a policy with regard to, how much might go from the short-term rental a year toward housing generally, but I'm not sure that it would be an exact link between bonding and the short-term rental revenue.
John, I think, was talking about a percentage allocation by the select board of the fund, that source of funds in terms of being dedicated to Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
So as I understand it, it can't be used to bond directly for us because it fluctuates, and if it's a percentage, and it's also subject to approval every budget cycle. So the way I look at this funding issue is it's a series of potential puzzle pieces that all have their benefits and advantages and disadvantages. And if the board will indulge me in my understanding of this to do a summary, is that short-term rental tax has to be approved year by year unless a stabilization fund is created. And a stabilization fund requires a vote of town meeting to allocate the funds for use. So that restricts it. So you're either subject to an annual allocation in the budget from the select board approved at town meeting that could change from year to year, can't be used for borrowing. CPC allocation that can be used for borrowing, but has limitations on use, can't be used for operations, staff salaries, any of those things. And then a transfer fee is the most flexible because it's money that comes into the Affordable Housing Trust and can be utilized for whatever purposes we see fit, as the land bank uses their transfer fee. And the two possibilities for transfer fees are the housing bank additional transfer fee or a portion of the land bank fee being reallocated to the trust. So that's sort of, those are our sort of potential buckets, and they each have advantages and disadvantages. And I think the idea is to put together a package of funding that gives us the ability to do the things that we want to do with the flexibility we need in order to get the job done. So, so that's where I'm at. So what's the sense of this meeting in terms of taking action on this CPC? Does anyone want to put forth a motion, or do you think I can just take a sense of the meeting regarding a delay? Procedurally, Tucker or Ken, can you help me there?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the sense of the meeting is that we want to not try to get in front of the CPC next week. There are a few more questions that we want to get answered and make sure certain aspects can be addressed with what we would be seeking from the CPC. So if that is a correct understanding of what I've heard from the various board members, then I don't know that we need a formal vote today, but we do have the financial discussion again as an item on our agenda on Tuesday. So we probably will have a little further talk at this point, but this would not be on the CPC's agenda for next Tuesday as well.
Okay, so is there anyone who is not concurring with what Tucker just summarized? Okay, seeing no hands raised, or Ken?
I just want to say that I just had a huge sigh of relief because you may recall that last year at the 11th hour and the 58th minute, we went to the CPC and told them that they had to give us $5 million. And so the sense of us that our lack of planning shouldn't be their necessity was a significant reaction last year. To the extent that we have time to develop something and have it in a normal course come to them to review, so that it's not a last minute agenda addition item, makes this a much more greater chance of success in terms of achieving what we're trying to achieve as a community. Thank you.
So yeah, go ahead, Christy.
Thank you. And thank you, Ken, for all your work in last year and again this year. I'm wondering if it's worth bringing up at their meeting on Tuesday, Ken, just to give a background that we're planning this. I don't know if it's worse for them to not be in the loop, or at least to be notified that we're in this planning mode.
My concern is that if I bring it up, they're going to start to want all the details and everything, and we're not sure with respect to how it would work in terms of the different things. So the fact is that we're probably going to have a decision within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Their next meeting is the morning of your February meeting, just as our meet on a monthly basis. So as long as we have something to them for a couple of weeks beforehand, so I've had a chance to review it and think about it and talk about it, I think that's the kind of notice that's appropriate, because in fact, what we're doing is we're giving them notice 6 or 7 months in advance of what we're looking to ask them to do.
So I'm going to ask one more question of Ken. Rima, you and I were there last time when we made a request to the CPC, and the commissioners were very clear in their frustration that they keep being asked to be the funding source for housing whilst the town does not make a commitment from in another source, particularly in the town budget. And I'm wondering whether it might help the commissioners if we could also tell them that as a parallel measure, we're pursuing a funding source from the short-term rental tax. And do we want to pursue something like that is the question to my board members.
And my answer to your question is that I think that is a very astute observation. That is a sentiment that still sits with a significant number of the commission members. And so to the extent that there is a commitment on the part of the town itself in its budget, would be a very significant event in terms of the support for moving forward with this from the CPC's point of view, in my view.
Thank you, Ken. Dave?
I mean, I just think it's really important that we don't get desperate and lock ourselves into a funding source with so many strings attached. I mean, I think we need the CPC money, but we also need a fair amount of money that doesn't have all the strings attached. So I just think that we really need to think this out.
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
I would get a new audio system. I would add that I don't know. I think I like the part about the town budget. I don't know that we necessarily need to tie it to the short-term rental revenue. It's simply a budget item in the town budget, and the town has a variety of different sources from which it draws revenue.
Is there any appetite from the board to formalize a request like that?
I would say, can we talk about a specific request on Tuesday at that meeting?
Okay. Okay. Request from our staff to delay that till our next meeting. Okay. So anything, do we have anything else on the agenda other than, any more comments here before I move on to, I think the only other thing we have to confirm is our next meeting date? Ken?
Just Tucker and I have talked about this. One of the really very, very important things for no matter which way we go before the Community Preservation Committee is a detailed explanation of all that we've done and what the money's been committed to. And Penny's comment earlier about heads in beds goes a long way to addressing some of the concerns that expressed with respect to, hey, you've had all this money, what have you done with it? So I think it's creating a level of understanding of the timing of from the time that you have the money until in fact the shovel goes in the ground and the head in the bed, and where we are in that scenario is a really important part of any presentation that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund makes to the CPC.
Penny?
Just a follow up through you to Ken. Ken, are you still chair of the CPC?
Yes.
Is that not a conflict?
No. I am not a member of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I'm performing my role as a town employee, as staff to different organizations within the town.
Okay.
I have no financial benefit whatsoever as a result of any of these transactions.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Any other remarks, comments, suggestions, thoughts? Okay, so moving on to Tucker, just confirm our next meeting date and time, please.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for the great discussion today. Very, very helpful. And our next meeting is on Tuesday. So Monday is a holiday, Tuesday at 1 o'clock, sort of our regular monthly third Tuesday of the month meeting.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Penny, thank you.
Second.
Second? Christy, thank you. By roll call, Penny,
Aye.
Christy,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Ally,
Aye.
and Rima.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Thanks you guys so much for today. My apologies for the agenda confusion, and see you on Tuesday.
All good. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thanks,
everybody.
Brooke. Thanks,